First, a thank you to our tech director, Dr. Francis Turner. Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2016 Psychology Senior Thesis Presentations. That's your senior class there. What do you say? Before I get into introductions and the layout of the presentations, I wanted to invite our president up to give his greetings, President Mariana.
Thank you, Professor Hager. Wow, I did not know so many people were interested in psychology. Great. And I didn't recognize many of our psychology students. You're all dressed up. You look great. So what's the purpose of a college? What is the purpose of a college? It is not to have a great soccer team or a basketball team. It is not to drink beer on Thursday nights, although some would argue with that. The purpose of a college is very simple. It's threefold. It is to teach, it is to do research, and it is to serve the community. So I can think of no better way to celebrate those three purposes than to have an event like this where our great faculty is here who do the teaching, where our great students are here who are going to present their research, and where all of us are involved somehow or other in this great community in which we live. So I'm excited to see the presentations. I can't wait to see them. I've been hearing about them for weeks, so I'll turn it back to you, Professor Hager, and good luck to all.
So in order to start the day, you probably need a little background. This is, as I said, the senior capstone. The capstone in psychology is a year-long activity, and it begins with a semester of research training, statistical methods, and research design. At that point, the students begin to identify their research topics. Those topics may be something they want to study in grad school. A couple are doing that. Maybe it's part of a career, if you were looking at it that way, or it's just a passion for curiosity, something they really want to talk about or be able to talk more in depth and with a little power. You'll hear that today. The second semester, they build what's called an analytical literature review. For those of you who have gone to graduate school, and in fact may have done a master's thesis or a dissertation, this is that first chapter. This is your literature review for your dissertation. And when students go on to graduate school, I was telling a couple of them, every year I get emails from students who have gone to graduate school and said, I've got this part licked. They know how to write, they know how to be critical thinkers, they know how to present their work articulately, thoughtfully, and as I said, passionately. We have a running comment in class that you need to know more than just the books. And they really will demonstrate for you today that independent scholarship that has really been a hallmark of their year. Before we start, though, we cannot do this without many people. Our college librarians, I know there are several of you here. Would you stand up, please? Menlo College has an innovative personal librarian program for the senior class. And since the fall, they have been identifying their topic and sharing it with the librarian, particularly or with all of them. And I can safely tell you, librarians, that the thesis method sections often call you out by name for how helpful you've been, so thank you. There are also faculty here, and I hesitate to even try to identify them. Some are stuck in the standing room areas. If you can stand safely, please do so. If not, just give our faculty a shout out. And finally, as part of our community, we also have administrators. We can't make the place run without them. So we've got our provost down here, at least one academic dean. I'm not sure who else is here, but let's thank them too. And then finally, a direct tie to the president's introduction is how I'll transition off the podium. This class identified their theme in a brainstorming session. They threw words at me up here on the whiteboard. We took pictures. I went away and figured out what were they saying. And what they have been about passionately all year is raising awareness about their issues. You're going to hear some very powerful, some very hard-hitting issues. You're going to see equally hard-hitting graphics, so be prepared for those. The topics, some of them very powerful, others light, happy, but still with some heft. They're also talking this year, a lot of them, about how to change the world, how to change policies that are local, state, national, and in the case of one paper, international policies. Thus the quotation, often attributed to Gandhi, but actually another person wrote about it a little bit ahead of him. Be the change you want to see in the world. So to do that, one of our first presenter will speak actually about a monumental change that occurred about 30 years ago. And that would be Veronica Solari speaking with you today about in vitro fertilization.
Hello, I am Veronica Solari, and today I will be discussing the positive and negative outcomes associated with in vitro fertilization. The topics that I will be talking about today are psychological issues, marital relationships, lesbian couples, the critiques of the literature, and recommendations I have for the field. Psychological issues are one of the main complications associated with IVF. Research has shown that prior psychological disorders are associated with an increased risk of conceiving or an increased amount of conception, whereas women who have not experienced mental disorders do not have the same coping mechanisms. Anxiety and depression during IVF treatment are very prevalent. In fact, most of the anxiety and the depression are symptoms that are not reported to their doctors because they are afraid that if they tell their doctors that they're experiencing these symptoms, that they won't be eligible for further treatment if the first one is unsuccessful. Nausea and vomiting in relation to multiple gestations is highly correlated with IVF. In fact, if you have excessive nausea and vomiting, you are probably going to have multiple gestations or twins. Psychological issues are one of the main reasons for discontinuation of IVF treatment. It becomes too stressful and hard to overcome. Marital relationships are affected adversely. In fact, sexual intimacy and sexual functioning become periodical, mundane, and overall affected negatively. It becomes more for the power of conception instead of pleasure. Emotional distress is also associated highly with IVF. Couples tend not to trust each other anymore and become distant. Stress management is also something that couples have trouble with, and instability within the relationship as a whole is something they experience. Lesbian couples have created the new family model where there are two mothers and then their child or children. They do this because they are in hopes that they will have equal rights one day in terms of assisted reproductive technologies. There are homophobic doctors which refuse to help lesbian couples, and in turn they have to hide the fact that they are lesbians and their sexual orientation. Access to assisted reproductive technologies is not equal in the United States as of now. It's just started to occur, and in Europe they have actually seen what's happening over here, and in turn they have to change their laws as well. Lesbian couples handle parenting stress way better than heterosexual couples. They can communicate better and can relate to one another more than heterosexual couples can. Some critiques about the literature would be the fact that they don't really address ethical concerns. There is a high risk of physical or psychological harm, which gets brought up during interviews and also gets brought up during questionnaires. There's a huge demographic bias also within the literature. It's most likely on the wealthier side of Caucasian women or Caucasian couples. There's also a small sample size within the research. For interviews, it would be 2 to 8 women, and also there's relatively small sample sizes for the quantitative research as well. Qualitative research is also needed for the research. There aren't very many studies that have it. The recommendations I have for the field would be for individual therapy and couples therapy to be an option or even be a requirement in order to undergo IVF treatment. There's also a need to collect demographic information prior to conducting the research, so that way it can be more diverse. Research should also include a self-disclosure statement, so that way women know that they are at risk for psychological harm. Thank you for your time, and up next is Ashley Becker.
Child walk up to you and tell you that they're not pretty? The first question that might come to mind is, why would you say that? Why would you think that? Who told you that? My name is Ashley Becker, and I will be presenting you on who and what affects young children on how they perceive their body image. Which brought me to my research question of how does media, parents, and peers affect the perception of body image in young children? I will discuss how media takes an effect, how parents play a role, and how peers influence young children. I will then discuss my synthesis and offer my critiques and my recommendations. Children are influenced by what they see, whether that be a movie, a television show, a picture in a magazine, even a toy. It has been found that television, movies, and magazines don't take an effect on children until the age of 5. In 1996, 1 in 100,000 women had the body image of Barbie, and 1 in 50 had the body image of Ken. Today, that body shape is unrealistic. As you can see the 1990 Barbie and the 2000 Barbie, and below is a picture of a Disney princess. On the left is her waist size is unrealistic, and to the right is the normal body shape of what you and me may have. Children tend to idolize their parents. If you were to ask a child what they want to be like when they grow up, they may say something like strong and muscular like daddy, or thin and pretty like mommy. Parental comments matter to a child, whether it's direct or towards someone else. For example, a parent may be concerned about their own body image. They may go to the gym a lot every single day and they're working out, and a mother may think that she's overweight and they say that comment out loud to their child. They may look at their mom and say, no, you're not overweight. But if they think that and their parent says that, they may feel the need that they have to be that skinny when they're older. Also, if a parent were to be on the phone with, say, a friend talking about their hairstyle, saying that, my hair's a complete mess, I have to do something with it, a child may think that they have to do their hair every single day just to make sure that they look pretty enough. Children live in an appearance culture, which peers influence the body image. A child can easily see a difference between you and me, whether that be skin color, hair color, body shape, height. They see it. Girls tend to have high levels of teasing from other girls to be thin, and boys tend to have peer pressure to gain muscle. Thus, that brings it to a low body self-esteem and having body esteem on their body image and having self-satisfaction. So my synthesis is that all 3 of these themes are a problem. Media, parents, and peers need to find the right way to a solution for this problem. What I've come to conclude is that I think the best way is to let your child express themselves, whether that's letting them dress themselves and letting them know that it's okay to be different. Everyone is different in their own shape or size and what they perceive themselves to be. Some critiques that I have is that many of my studies were on older children, so from anywhere from middle school all the way up to adulthood. I personally wanted to look at from the ages of 3 to 8 years old, and there's a lack of that in the study. There's also a lot about eating disorders. I know when it comes to body image, it also has to do with eating disorders and your weight, and that's not what I specifically wanted to study. Also, the sample size was not very big. It really did talk a lot about young girls and not enough about boys. And also the ethnicity. There needs to be more population on the race, and there's a lot about Caucasians. So some recommendations would have to be is that talk more about boys. I mean, they also have a perception on their body image too. Also, what about the fathers? I know the fathers have to have some type of play in this and not just the mothers. And also, along with the methods, there was a lot of questionnaires and scales done, and I personally feel like there should be more interviews and just asking a child, what do you think may make you feel like what's pretty and what's not pretty, or how you perceive your own body image. That concludes my speech, and next up is Mariana Pierson on parenting styles.
Sit up straight. Uncross your legs. Can you pay attention? This is an example of what an authoritarian parent would say to their child. Hi, I'm Mariana Pierson, and today I'm going to be discussing just how much parenting styles affect children's behaviors. I will start with the problem and the solution that has arisen, and I will give you some operational definitions. I will then move into my themes of internalizing and externalizing behaviors, and I will conclude with critiques and recommendations of my research. The problem that has arisen is that children have these huge capacities and they aren't being nurtured by their parents, meaning that a child is unable to live up to their fullest potential. The second problem is that the awareness of this topic is dangerously low. And right now, there are no policies that have been put into place requiring parents to take classes before having a child. And so the solution that I've come up with is that in order to raise a generation that's going to impact our world, we first need to focus on bettering our parenting styles. In the 60s, a psychologist named Diana Baumrind came up with these 3 parenting styles that you see. I have color-coded and boxed the first, meaning that this will create the most pro-social behavior in a child. And so, an authoritative parent is extremely rational, giving their child freedom, but also giving their child boundaries. The second I have color-coded in red, meaning that this will create the least pro-social behavior in a child. An authoritarian parent is high in control and gives their child no freedom with very high limitations. An example of this can be seen in the movie Cinderella. Lastly, we have a permissive parent, who is very lenient and can often be described as a yes parent. 2 examples of this are Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka's I Want It Now scene, or Regina's mom in Mean Girls. The chart you see describes how each parenting style falls under the category of responsiveness and demandingness. And you will also see that the bolded words are words that can be used to describe each parenting style. For this presentation, I will be focusing mainly on authoritative and authoritarian, which are both high in demandingness. The only difference is that authoritative is high in responsiveness, meaning that this parent will give their child a lot of warmth and affection, whereas an authoritarian parent is low in responsiveness, giving their child no warmth and no affection. My first theme is externalizing behaviors, which can most commonly be seen as aggression and delinquency. How a parent interacts with their child is going to be one of the biggest lessons that that child gets on how to interact with other children. And right now, externalizing behaviors are the most common and persistent form of maladjustment in both childhood and in adolescence. An authoritative parent is going to create a child with the least amount of externalizing behaviors, whereas an authoritarian parent will create a child with the most externalizing behaviors. So naturally, all children are born with a temperament, and humans learn by example through a process called the social learning theory, meaning that an aggressive parent will also create an aggressive child. And since this process is a reciprocal, then an aggressive child will also create an aggressive parent. Now, boys and girls do express their aggression differently. Boys expressing more physically through hitting and kicking, whereas girls express their aggression relationally through gossip, spreading lies, rumors, and intentionally excluding others from their group. And with all of this aggression, it is much more likely that a child will become a delinquent later on in life, and it can even lead to a faster first arrest. My second theme is internalizing behaviors, which can most commonly be seen as depression and anxiety. Similar to externalizing behaviors, internalizing behaviors will also be affected by both authoritarian and authoritative parenting styles. An authoritarian parenting style will create the most externalizing behaviors, whereas an authoritative will create the least. This is because authoritarian parents have very high and unreasonable standards that they set for their children, whereas an authoritative parent is very rational and practices effective communication. For example, if my little brother was helping carry in the groceries and decided to carry a large gallon of milk and then spilled it all over the floor, my parents could have two options of how to react. If they chose the authoritarian route, they would say things such as, "You're so dumb, what were you thinking, why would you carry that in the first place, you can never do anything right." And if they chose the authoritative route, then they would say something such as, "That's okay, we'll clean it up together, and next time we can talk about something that might be a little easier for you to carry." After all, we shouldn't cry over spilled milk. Some critiques I have are that the demographics were extremely poor, and a recommendation for that would be to include more diversity. There were also high correlations rather than statistically significant causal results, which can be fixed by incorporating more longitudinal research. There was a low response rate due to the fact that mostly surveys were used in the research, which can be fixed by incorporating more qualitative data, such as interviews. There was a small sample size across most research and very few self-reported results. And as I mentioned earlier, the main two recommendations that I have are to pay more consistent attention to this topic and to begin implementing policies on requiring parents to take classes to learn proper discipline for their children. Thank you. And next up is Emebet.
Hello everyone, my name is Emebet Aklilu, and today I will be discussing the birth order effect. Now I'll first begin with a couple questions. How many of you are only children? Just raise your hand. Woo, we got one. Oh, we got two. How many of you are middle-born? You have one above you and one below. Awesome. And how many of you are last-born? Oh, wow. All right. And sorry, I forgot the eldest children. We like you too. Okay. Awesome. Great. Okay, so today that is what I will be discussing, how these different roles relate with different styles and how the personality development is overall different. Really quickly, I would also like to describe my own family. There are 4 children on the screen. I am the youngest, so I'm number 4. Normally, I would say that my personality traits are really descriptive of the last-born child, but because my closest sibling is 10 years older than me, I personally relate more closely to the only child feel. I guess you can say my parents saved the best for last. I would like to begin with an overview. I will begin with my research question, move into my 3 themes, and end with some critiques and recommendations. Beginning with academic success, we can see that 3 factors that contribute to this are problem-based learning, context specificity, and hierarchy versus innovation. Problem-based learning is a strategy used in classrooms when teachers place students in groups based on their rank. So for example, we would put all middle children in one specific group, and then we would work out a problem together. We would have a problem on the board that our teacher would help guide us through, and collaboratively we would come up with ideas of solving this problem. Then we would be able to transfer those skills using context-specific clues in the real world, transferring these skills that we learned in the problem-based setting into the real world. This ties to academic success because students are better equipped to maneuver problems both in the classroom and in the real world. Our next topic is hierarchy versus innovation. The difference can be seen in these two charts. First and only children prefer hierarchical roles, meaning they prefer courses such as math and science that follow a specific structure that lend to very logical and analytical thinking, while middle and last-born children prefer styles that incorporate innovation so that they can be flexible and sociable, encouraging others to participate in discussions as well. Birth order is a great contributor to why children of the same family with similar genes end up with very different personalities. This also shows that hierarchy and innovation ties into personality styles and personality development. One major factor stated in the research is that the Big Five personality traits are descriptive of personality traits that we exhibit across the sibship or across our specific birth ranks. Eldest and only children tend to be more conscientious and neurotic because they tend to spend more time with parents, learning closely authority roles and learning how to be in charge. That's their job. Middle children tend to be more agreeable. They kind of get the, I don't want to say the worst of everything, but that kind of happens sometimes because they have younger siblings. And the last ones tend to be more extroverted and open to experience. Take a moment to look at this chart. Find yourself on this chart. Not all of these traits are going to apply to you, so don't get mad at me. But just know that some of these are very specific to our birth rank, and they can be changed based on environmental factors and familial influences. You guys can signal me when you're ready. Okay. Going into differential treatment, we can see that there are 4 ways that it manifests: privileges, chores, affection, and discipline. Specifically, discipline and affection are tied to gender of both the parent and the child. This means that a male, so the father, will be harder or more likely to discipline their male son if he does not successfully fulfill this gender role requirement. The same can be said for the female or for the daughter with their relationship to their mother. On the other hand, affection, although highly displayed by mothers, it can also be displayed by both parents if the gender role is completed properly by the children. Next, a great factor that contributes to sibling rivalry is that the eldest siblings both receive the best and the worst of everything, specifically when tied to privileges and chores. Eldest siblings tend to get more free reign because they have spent the most amount of time with their parents, yet they can also be dealt the most chores or the most responsibility because they have younger siblings to look after. The familial influences that are specifically related to sibling rivalry can be seen when attention and affection are not properly distributed amongst the children, and they can be brought about by either through parent-produced ways or sibling-initiated situations. In both situations, parents are the root, and children are seeking to gain the attention from their parents, but it is either a situation created by the parent or it is something that the siblings compete against for their parents' attention. Next, I would like to offer some critiques and recommendations. Primarily across my research, I found studies that talk about a specific point in time, and I don't think that that is representative enough or describes a person's life or what they're capable of and what success means. I can't judge success for you in this point in time because you may not be there yet, and I think the research should better understand that people change. Diverse sample bases needs to be included as well because although there were specific targets or regions that were studied, it's not generalizable to a general population. Meta-analyses need to explore more variables associated with birth order because there are many confounds that kind of confuse or muddle how much birth order is linked to academic and social success. And lastly, socioeconomic status needs to be better studied because financial stability in the family needs to be understood because resources are diluted as each child is born into conception. Thank you so much for your time.
My name is Rebecca Allen, and I will be talking to you today about divorce and the transition that the causes and consequences it has. So, by a show of hands in this room, how many people have gone through a divorce? All right, keeping your hands up. How many people in this room know someone who's experienced a divorce? All right, so by the show of hands, the majority of people know someone or have experienced a divorce themselves. According to data, the divorce rates were from the 1980s to 1900s to 1980s, the divorce rates increased. However, from the peak of divorce in the 1980s, it declined. Why, you may ask? There are many factors. The biggest reason is that the statistics strictly include those who are legally divorced and those who are legally married. There is no in-between with cohabitation, which has been on the rise. So, therefore, in my definition, though it includes those who are legally divorced, those who are married and separated and no longer living together, and those who are in domestic partnerships who are cohabitating but no longer live together. So my hypothesis was that divorce can lead to the negative impact on children's social and internal and external emotional and social well-being. My goals were to bring awareness of the issue and not to look at divorce as being the main cause, but to look at the factors and effects that surround the transition. Also, I'd like to look at those and look at ease in the transition for both not only the child, but the parent themselves. So the three variables that I studied were gender, age, and the change in family dynamics. For gender, males were more external, meaning that they were more physical in their coping strategies, and they were less attached to people. Females, on the other hand, they were more internal and they were more emotionally dependent on people. For marriage, when looking at single mother households and then also looking when they remarry, males tend to have more problems when their single mother did not remarry due to lack of male influence. Females, they had more problems when the mother remarried, possibly due to competition with the stepfather for the mother's attention. For age, blame who? The younger were more emotional and they were more into looking at blaming themselves. So the older group, they were more cognitive and logical of their surroundings and looked at the factors rather than themselves. So both for the younger and the older, they both need a predictable, supportive, and structured environment to develop, and with the divorce, it can hinder that. So with the change in family dynamics, there are different expectations that can be put on the child. So you have more responsibilities and they're seen to be more mature, where they're more seen as being the confidant rather than the child, and that can add extra stressors, leading to adjustment problems such as acting out, isolation, and a lower sense of self. So when comparing those of divorce and intact families, I use the child behavior checklist. The child behavior checklist, it measures the perception of the child's behavior. The divorced children were ranked to have higher issues versus the intact, such as heightened social anxiety and acting out physically in both their home and school environment. So what helped, you may ask? Improved communication, parent-child interaction, and the relationship with at least one parent seemed to ease the transition and to help them into adulthood. So some practices and programs that came across were online programs, one-on-one counseling, also in group counseling and skills training. Keep in mind that there are a lot of different factors that go into it, and so there are an array of programs and not one benefits just everyone all together. So Chasmore, he studied the children and realized that they want three key messages, that there's three key messages in which kids want during their transition. They want to be kept informed on what is happening and to be included in some decision making, as well as be heard. They'd also like contact with their parents to be workable and flexible, over the divorce transition, but also it was included that they wanted beforehand, knowing beforehand about what's going to happen later on. So knowing what children want and the factors helps ease a transition by looking at the different programs and techniques. The earlier and the better. Or the earlier the better. So counseling, it was the #1 looked upon program that helped, because it helped children maintain and bond and restore with their parents. So for my critiques and recommendations, why study children? There are many of the research that I found, they focus on the children, but rarely do they include the children themselves. They looked at getting the data from the parents, the teachers, and the counselors. So my recommendation is to ask the kids with permission, of course, because they are a protected population. Also, when looking at studying, look at the father custody versus just not the single mother custody, because there are different factors also mentioned earlier with the gender roles, and so you need to see how that affects the children. There were no similarities when comparing the data and the methods, only the findings. So there needs to be more standardization rather than just a child behavior checklist, because there was nothing else in there. There was a lack of training and resources for the children, and so my recommendation is to look in making counseling mandatory for those filing for a divorce, and to implement it into school so children have better access. That is all I have, and next up is Risa Yamanaka.
Good afternoon, my name is Risa Yamanaka, and today I'll be presenting on my thesis, War: The Unknown Lives of Refugees. My focus will be on the effect of war-related trauma and stress on refugee families. Approximately 14 million people are registered refugees last year. This is deemed the world's largest humanitarian crisis since World War II. In addition, about 60 million people are at risk of becoming refugees and are living in dangerous environments. Despite these numbers, a study reported that only 1/10 of their participants actually sought government help. So my agenda for today will be to discuss some of the themes in my thesis: the refugee trauma, their resettlement experience, and how they cope with their trauma, and the prevention and treatment offered to them today, as well as my critique on the existing literature and my recommendations for future research. I want to first start off by addressing some of the problems that the refugees face on a daily basis. Many researchers state that refugees have a higher risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder and subject to discrimination and social exclusion. So my research question today was, what are the variables that affect their experiences as refugees, and how do they ultimately affect the familial relationship outcomes? So what happens when a family member is exposed to war trauma? According to studies, transmission of trauma is frequently observed in refugee families. For example, secondary trauma is when a parent or an adult caretaker displays symptoms of PTSD, and in turn, they will be transmitted to their children. And intergenerational trauma is often seen in countries with a history of war conflict, and these will be transferred through generations in the forms of war stories or witness accounts and other anecdotes. And what we're probably most familiar with in regards to refugees is probably the images of their forced migration process. I wanted to learn the stories behind these images. According to studies, there are some changes that occur within the family, including resource loss. They lose resources such as money, profession, reputation, and their family roles, such as the main providers of the families will tend to lose this role due to the resources that they've lost, so they're no longer able to provide for their families. And each member of the family will go through an acculturation process. This is when they must adapt to the new culture so that they'll be able to gain back those resources and be able to have the lifestyles that they want. And these will hinder parent-child relationships because of the differences in the abilities to adapt to the new culture and the acquisition of the new language. And how do refugee families cope with the trauma and the daily stress that they face? Well, many researchers from different areas of the psychology field have teamed up to collaborate to come up with a solution so that refugees may be able to cope with their trauma better. And this is when they came up with the theory of resilience. Many trauma victims have reported post-traumatic growth. This means that they have found benefits through their traumatic experiences and were able to make sense of their trauma so that they were better able to cope. And high levels of optimistic personality traits have been linked to high levels of post-traumatic growth in trauma victims. And hardy characteristics, such as the ability to see trauma as a new challenge, have also been correlated to being able to overcome adversity in trauma victims. The prevention and treatment that is offered to refugees today include cultural context, education, and integration of different government departments to hit all the aspects of the refugee experiences in the treatment and prevention. The cultural maintenance of the original culture is deemed as significant as being able to adapt to the new culture so that they may be able to have a bit smoother transition to resettlement. And less isolation for children. Researchers concluded that family members tend to protect their children in a way that the children are not able to have the accurate knowledge of the war and the surrounding environment and what is happening to them and why it's happening to them. So that they are no longer able to make sense of the trauma and then they're no longer able to cope. And language skills for both parents and children are needed so that they may be able to regain back the resources that they've lost and are able to find employment and assimilate to a new culture efficiently. The critique and recommendations I have include sample demographics, assessment tools, and research methods. I believe that refugees who have not been registered in government agencies or private organizations should be studied as well so that we're better able to understand some of the other experiences that they may face. And developing a tool that caters to specific culture and language for assessment should be needed so that they may be able to convey their feelings and experiences better and we're able to assess them as well. And longitudinal research, as we discussed, there are various changes that occur to them in a period of time. So longitudinal research will be able to have us study their changes over a development time. And next, thank you for listening. And next up is Vanessa Escobar.
I have a question. How many of you have been bullied or have witnessed someone being bullied? Now, how many of you have reported it to either a friend, a peer, or an authority figure? I'm glad that for a lot of you, you guys had the courage to report this, and for many others, this may not be the case. According to the U.S. Department of Education, in 2013, 5 million students, K-12, reported being bullied, and that doesn't count for the ones that did not report it. Bullying is a major concern of mine because as an elementary school volunteer and as a big sister of 2, I don't want any of the students I work with or my siblings to face the adverse consequences of being bullied. For the purpose of my presentation, I want to bring awareness and help combat bullying, which is also why my presentation will be blue, since it is the ribbon that represents bullying awareness. My name is Vanessa Escobar, and today I will be discussing the risk factors of bullying and intervention programs. For my research hypothesis, I had it written down, and it has been changed a little bit, but for the most part, it is hypothesized that individuals who are bullied as children will have a higher risk of developing an offending career as a bully or develop a mental health issue, like anxiety, as a victim in adulthood. On today's agenda, I will be discussing the participants of bullying, which includes bullies, victims, and bully victims,
gender differences, mental health, delinquency and criminality, and intervention programs. Starting with the characteristics of bullies, they tend to have dominant behaviors and have dominant personalities in which they are the people that want everybody to conform to their behaviors. They also have defiant behavior and comorbid conditions, which includes, which has underlying factors to be taken into account, which include problems within the home. The characteristics of victims are that they are submissive, have low self-esteem, and have difficulty making friends. So that is why they are isolated most of the time. So for bully victims, it is a relatively new term, which is exactly what the name indicates. They are bullies and victims themselves. They tend to have impulsive behaviors, poor social skills, and low self-esteem. Moving on to the gender differences and starting with the boys, bullying takes the form of physical bullying, which includes kicking, punching, and shoving. And they also have relational violence, and size has a major influence. In a focus group, a boy in elementary school stated, if the bully knows that the person is bigger or stronger, they do not bully them. So how do girls participate in bullying? So social exclusion, jealousy, and appearance play a big factor. In another focus group, a girl was asked why she bullied other girls, and she stated that she hated the fact that they were so perfect. On to the next theme of mental health. Anxiety was the most prominent disorder associated with bullying. In a study conducted by the researchers listed, they found that peer victimization at age 13 was associated with a higher risk of developing an anxiety disorder in adulthood. Depression was also another disorder associated with being bullied, in which was more prevalent in ages 8 through 16. For suicide ideation, another study conducted by the researchers listed, they found that 123 of the 182 patients had suicide ideations, threats, or plans to attempt suicide over being bullied. That counts for 67% of the patients. For delinquency and criminality, delinquency tends to have a domino effect in which it begins with having a negative attitude towards school, which then may lead to truancy, and then it may lead to the experimentation of drugs, sex, or alcohol. Males had a higher likelihood of developing a criminal career over females. The comorbidity also plays a role because there can be underlying issues, which include problems within the home and then peer pressure. To my surprise, more victims have developed a criminal career rather than bullies, as I had hypothesized. So what have schools used to combat bullying? A lot of you may have heard of the zero tolerance policy, but the Daniel-Lewis bullying prevention program is a better alternative. The zero tolerance policy typically includes a specified punishment, typically long-term suspension or expulsion, regardless of the seriousness of the infraction, whether it was intentional or unintentional. So as a school volunteer, I have seen the in-office suspensions where the child is given loads of work and isn't allowed to leave the room. That child really doesn't learn why bullying should stop. Rather, they learn that they are fearful of getting caught. The Daniel-Lewis bullying prevention program is a better alternative because it is a school-wide approach as opposed to the zero tolerance policy, which is a more of an individual approach. On a school level, Daniel-Lewis suggested a couple of ways that the school can incorporate bullying prevention. The first one is holding staff meetings where the teacher or somebody is there and they help control the bullying process. And another is school rules against bullying should be introduced in the beginning of the school year or in preschool. The school should also refine the supervisory system because bullying doesn't just take place in the classroom, it could take place on playgrounds. So there should be a supervisor there to make sure that it doesn't happen there. The school should also make it fun and kick off an event to launch the program. So for my school, where I volunteer, they have Red Ribbon Week to combat against drug use. There should be a Blue Ribbon Week, which combats against bullying. Some of the critiques and recommendations that I have found were that When an observer is in the classroom, the child tends to act differently. So if the teacher participates in making observations and noting down things that they have seen different, they can have better representation of their results. So what does bullying mean? Many of the students that were being interviewed didn't know exactly what the difference between being bullied and what is a conflict. So there should be a presentation on what the forms of bullying are, and also there should be something promoting pro-social behavior. There was a lot of focus groups in my literature, and they should be gender specific because a boy may not be comfortable expressing how they feel when a girl is present, and vice versa, where a girl may not be comfortable expressing what she feels when a boy is present. Bullying is a very serious issue, and I will conclude by a poem written by a 3rd grader for her class. School is a safe place to learn, grow, and play. If you speak up and stand up, bullies can't ruin your day. Thank you. Up next is Raquel.
Hi, I'm Raquel DeJesus, and I will be discussing the effects and benefits that sports can provide children and adolescents, which can then affect their future development and behaviors. I'm going to start off by stating my research question, and then I'm going to discuss the importance of this topic and go into my 3 themes, which include the social, academic, and psychological effects of sports. I will also discuss the relationship between sports and socioeconomic status, and end with some critiques and recommendations for future research, practice, and policy. My research question is, how can participating in sports affect children and adolescents' development and behaviors for the future? This topic is important because studies have shown that sports are associated with many life and health benefits. However, only 19% of adolescents reported being physically active for at least 20 minutes a day, and this percentage continues to decrease as children and adolescents get older. There are also many other factors that can affect participation in sports, such as the environment that these children and adolescents live in, their family income, and socioeconomic status. Sport participation has been associated with the positive development of friendships and social relationships, which can then lead to social networks and successful job opportunities for the future. Sports have also been associated with the development of pro-social behaviors and social skills, such as being more respectful, being able to communicate well, and being able to work with a group of people efficiently and effectively. Sport participation has also been associated with an increase in academic success and achievement. Studies have shown that being physically active can actually improve concentration and focus in school, therefore increasing test scores and GPAs. Sports have also been associated with an increase in school attendance and engagement, meaning that students choose to be more involved in school and school activities. Those who choose to be more involved in school are more likely to continue their education in the future, which can then help them receive higher degrees and more successful job opportunities as well. There are many psychological benefits that come with sports, such as an increase in self-esteem, confidence, overall well-being, and mental and physical health. A breadth of participation has also been associated with greater positive development and psychological effects, meaning that participating in multiple sports may be more beneficial than one, but participating in one may still be more beneficial than none. Sports have also been associated with a decrease in depression and anxiety because they allow children and adolescents to stay active, busy, and distracted in a good way. A surprising finding that I found while doing this research was that socioeconomic status can affect whether or not children and adolescents participate in sports. For instance, those from high socioeconomic backgrounds and live in 2-parent households are more likely to participate in sports and receive the benefits that come with it because they are able to afford it. Whereas those from low socioeconomic backgrounds and single-parent households are less likely to participate in sports and receive the benefits that come with it due to the lack of resources that they have. They are also more likely to become antisocial, feel more isolated, and are more prone to developing emotional and physical distress. Even though there are many positive outcomes associated with sport participation, one negative outcome is an increase in alcohol consumption between the ages of 13 and 20 for both males and females. Male hockey and football players are more likely to drink than other male athletes, and female soccer players are more likely to drink than other female athletes. Reasons for why adolescent athletes drink may be due to peer pressure and trying to fit in with their teammates. They may also use drinking as a coping strategy when trying to manage their sport with their schoolwork and social lives. Other critiques found throughout the research besides drinking include response bias, since most of the responses came from the parents or teachers of the children and adolescents, meaning that they may have different perspectives on sports, behavior, and development. Another one is a self-report bias for those adolescents who may not have been completely honest about their drug and alcohol use. Many studies mention that schools are beginning to cut athletic programs and physical education due to the lack of funding and budget cuts, which decreases the opportunities for all children and adolescents to participate in sports despite their socioeconomic backgrounds. Another critique is that many schools require their students to maintain a certain GPA in order to participate in a sport. This may be beneficial for those who already succeed academically, but less beneficial for those who struggle academically because they may not be allowed to participate in a sport due to their low GPAs. Some recommendations include more qualitative data, such as having more face-to-face interviews with the children and adolescents themselves, rather than the parents and teachers. Fundraising within schools and throughout the community in order to keep athletic programs and physical education, and allowing students with low GPAs to participate in sports because sports may be just what they need in order to increase their GPAs. Thank you for your time. Next up
Good afternoon. So a year ago, I embarked on a one-year study abroad program at Kansai Gaidai University in Osaka, Japan. Prior to that, I had not traveled outside the country, nor had I stepped outside the state of California. And to make things even more interesting, I could not speak a single word of Japanese at the time. However, during my time in Japan, I was able to experience so many wonderful things, and I was able to meet people from all over the world. And I was also able to form strong international relationships that have lasted all the way up until this day, and hopefully for the many years to come. My name is Evan Lee, and I would like to share with you the learning outcomes and benefits associated with study abroad. So something interesting that came across my research was the Abraham Lincoln Study Abroad Commission. It was proposed in 2005 by United States Senator Richard Durbin and Paul Simon. This bill was proposed in response to the September 11th attacks, and they believe that the most constructive way to defend against future vulnerabilities is to create a subsidized study abroad program for students. This would give students the opportunity to travel the world, interact with other people from different backgrounds, experience new cultures, as well as spreading their own culture. The goal of the bill was to send 1 million students abroad, American students abroad, annually by the year 2017. Unfortunately, the bill died in committee. However, educators are still determined to meet that 1 million year goal. As of the 2013 to 2014 academic year, the Institute of International Education reported that approximately 300,000 American students participated in study abroad programs. So this is the research question that has driven my project for the entire year. Do study abroad programs provide a unique learning environment that students cannot experience in the classroom? And for today, I'd like to go over 3 main themes of my thesis: global citizenship, creativity, intercultural communication, and I'll finish with some critiques and recommendations. So first off, what is global citizenship? Or what is a global citizen? A global citizen is someone who identifies with being, My apologies. So, a global citizen is someone who identifies with being a part of an emerging world community. One of the core characteristics of someone who's a global citizen is someone who has developed a global perspective. So what does that entail? Someone who has a global perspective has the ability to understand that their own personal view of the world may not be universally shared with someone else in a different part of the world. It also requires them to be efficient in their interpersonal skills, which will allow them to interact with people who come from different cultural backgrounds. With the wonders of modern technology and the innovations that have come out in the past few decades, the world has become more connected than it has ever been before. Your ideas and concepts can be shared across borders with just a simple click of a button. Companies can conduct business meetings through applications such as Skype at any time. And this is why we need to prepare students to be able to interact on a global scale. Which brings me to my next theme, creativity. The interesting thing about creativity is that it has many different definitions. However, one study by Maddox and Galinsky operationalized the term as being the ability to bring a concept or an idea into existence that is both novel and useful. They further elaborated that is the aha moment that someone experiences when they come up with a new idea. Lee, Thoreau, and Linderholt emphasize that the adaptation phase of the study abroad experience is the critical period in which creativity can develop and flourish. They discussed how when a person enters an environment that is completely unfamiliar to them, and that where the surroundings are, where they cannot make sense of their surroundings, they believe that the natural instinct for them is to apply cultural scripts that they're familiar with in order to attempt to understand the culture around them. The problem with that is that sometimes those cultural scripts may not be appropriate for the culture you're in. So as a result, the individual would modify their cognitive and behavioral processes in order to create new scripts to accommodate the new environment. And lastly, I'd like to discuss intercultural communication. So intercultural communication refers to the cultural variability and diversity influences on interpersonal communication. In order for an individual to be an optimally functioning communicator in a pluralistic society, they need to demonstrate the level of intercultural competence and cultural sensitivity in order to communicate effectively. One of the core elements of being efficient at communicating interculturally is knowing your cultural identity, knowing where you come from, how your culture has shaped you to this day. But one thing to keep in mind is that everyone has multiple identities throughout the lifespan. Consider how you identified yourself in middle school or high school or college, or even during your adult life. These are all identities that you have developed over the lifespan, and they are constantly changing. You're moving in and out, discarding some, taking the best aspects of some of them, and creating an identity that you feel defines you. And one final thing to keep in mind is that when you're interacting with people who come from different backgrounds is to be respectful, be patient, try to be understanding that your views may differ, and hopefully you guys will be able to get along. And lastly, I would like to finish with some critiques and recommendations. First off, my topic is still relatively new. There seems to be a lack of foundational research. However, I think we're off to a good start, and I think that future work needs to be done in order to propel the field forward. There also seems to be a lack of longitudinal studies. The majority of studies I've read consisted of students who participated in programs that only lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months or even a semester. Personally, I would like to see what the long-term benefits of study abroad programs are for students who study abroad for a year or more. Another critique that I have is that study abroad programs can vary greatly. Depending on where you are in the world, some programs value academia, while others value language proficiency or cultural enrichment. And lastly, there seems to be a lack in diversity among study abroad students. The majority of the studies that I found consisted of sample populations that were comprised of Caucasian females, and that was something that I also observed during my own study abroad experience. And I think the best way to remedy that is to create more opportunities for students, provide more resources that will allow them to travel the world, because I don't think that having the chance to experience the world and learn about other cultures should not be restricted to where you come from or your socioeconomic status. That concludes my presentation. And now we will begin our 15-minute intermission, and we will